I want to preface this panel. You can see that it's titled Tourism, Housing, Scarcity, and Heritage, Who Gets to Visit and Who Gets to Live Here? And just about every panel that we've had throughout the day today, you've heard housing come up. You've heard displacement come up. You've heard gentrification come up. You've heard conversations about short-term rentals. You've heard conversations about vacation home rentals. And if I'm being honest, in the lead up to this event, we had one-to-one interviews with around 50 stakeholders from across the Cape and Islands. And the number one issue, far and away above every other issue, the number one issue that was brought up consistently was the concern surrounding housing. And I think that's something that resonates with a lot of people in this room and a lot of different tourism destinations. So with that said, I'm honored to bring in this next panel that is full of stakeholders that are regionally relevant, so they can give you the story of housing here on the Cape and Islands. They're gonna dive deep into the issues. I've told them to be bold. I've told them, which you all know is already one of our rules, but I've told them to be bold ahead of time as well, and to please give us the full-scale scope of what the issue is like here and what tourism is doing wrong, what tourism is doing right, and so really looking forward to hearing from everybody here. So I'll introduce them one by one real quick, and then I will leave it to you guys. So first, I just want to bring up our moderator. She's the executive officer of the Home Builders and Remodelers Association of Cape Cod. Please put your hands together for Stefanie Coxe. Next up, I'm very excited to welcome up to the stage the Chief Program Officer of the Community Development Partnership, Andrea Aldana. Welcome up, Andrea. And there we go. And next, it's my honor to welcome up the CEO of the Housing Assistance Corporation. Please welcome up Alisa Magnotta.
Thank you.
And last but not, that one wasn't ready for my voice. Last but not least, I'm very excited to welcome up from Amplify POC, the founder and CEO, Vargas Wallace.
Thanks, Wes. All right, well, we decided to mix it up a little bit. We're all comfortable standing and feel like it's nice to bring a little fresh energy into the room. You know, this is the midpoint in the day where everyone's like, you know, needs that coffee or to stretch or what have you. So feel free to get up, but we're going to dive right in. Paul framed the conversation perfectly for us in terms of what the challenges are, what the impacts that are going on as far as the displacement that we're seeing of our workforce, how that's impacting the characters that make up our community. So the secret's out. The Cape is a great place to live. We are very fortunate in having such a gorgeous place that has attracted so many visitors and has sustained our economy for so long. But and this is not a unique to tourism locations issue, but when production is outpaced by demand, and we don't build enough or the right types of housing, you start to see this type of displacement. And you start to see income disparities. You see people who have second, third, fourth homes having far more money to be able to buy than the local workforce. And so obviously, as a result of that, you have displacement. So my panelists and colleagues in the Cape community are doing some great work addressing these issues. Do each one of you just want to introduce yourselves real quick, and just for those who may not be familiar with what your organizations do? Andrea?
Yeah.
Andrea, sorry.
Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm Andrea Aldana. I work at the Community Development Partnership. We are a community development corporation. We're a nonprofit. We exclusively serve the 8 towns of the Lower and Outer Cape. So if no one has shown you the elbow today yet, it's these towns on the outside. And we work to help people live, work, and thrive in the Lower and Outer Cape. We do this through, supporting strategies for year-round housing production, supporting small businesses, and then we also work on systems change by building the region's capacity to make better decisions, hopefully to produce more housing.
And Alisa?
Good afternoon. My name is Alisa Magnotta. I'm the CEO of Housing Assistance Corporation. We are the regional housing agency that does everything from homelessness to home ownership, meaning we have family homeless shelters. We have an outreach team that goes out into the woods and actually works with individuals who are homeless or living in their car or living temporarily without a regular place to call home, and try to connect them back into resources. We also have rental assistance, and then we're developers, we're builders, so we're building home ownership opportunities and rental opportunities so that people like you and me, regular working people, can stay living here year-round.
And last but not least, Tara.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tara Vargas Wallace, and I'm the CEO of Amplify POC, and we are a racial equity organization. We're a nonprofit organization that focuses on closing the racial wealth gap and fostering ownership in communities of color. So we do a lot with entrepreneurs. We do a lot with homeowners, and as well as policy as well. Thank you.
And all fantastic colleagues to work with. So, let's start with that resident, that local workforce experience. Before we start to get into the causes, the solutions, what have you, let's talk about the human aspect. Tara, can we start with you about, what you see as being the experience, the lived experience for folks, in the workforce, particularly the tourism and hospitality?
Yeah, so in order to preserve, I keep thinking about, how we're trying to preserve the charm of Cape Cod, but we really have to, in order to do that, we have to protect the people who are here, who are in the service industry, immigrants, the BIPOC population, service industry folks, and those are the folks that are most disproportionately displaced, right? So they're the ones who are living double-dub, living in substandard housing, basements, crowded up in, 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, and it's an injustice, and it's something that we need to fix. It's a huge problem.
And either of you feel free to jump in with any statistics or local stories that you have. Otherwise, I'll jump to the next question. We'll kind of go throughout that.
Well, the only thing I'll add is that I've lived here for 25 years and raised my 3 daughters here, and I bought at the height of the market and couldn't afford my house. We had to get second and third jobs to be able to live here, and I was one of those families that pitched a tent in my mother-in-law's backyard so I could rent my house out to be able to afford to stay living here. And it's a commitment to the community. It's a commitment to our families that are here and raising our children here that makes it the vibrancy of that's the great part about Cape Cod, really. I mean, it's a beautiful place, but there are a lot of beautiful places. It is, like Tara's saying, and I know Andrea and Steph and everybody feels the same, it's about the people. It's about the people who live here and the community that we build, and that all comes back to the foundation of housing. We have participatory democracy here. We have town meeting. People need to be invested. I grew up in Michigan, where you go to the ballot box. Lived in California, you go to the ballot box. It's very distant. Here, we go to town meeting. We're on committees in our towns. You need people that are invested in the place in order to sustain the people.
Yeah, if I can add, I moved here in 2011. And when I moved here, I learned a term that I had never heard before called the summer shuffle. And this is a real experience that probably a lot of you have heard of, where you have a winter rental and you have a summer rental, because there aren't year-round rentals. Like, we basically have a 0% vacancy rate on the Cape because we just don't have year-round rentals, particularly on the lower and outer Cape. And it is a very, very common experience for residents, workers, to have to move twice a year. And can you just imagine the stress that brings to your life? And how can you show up as a full community member and, contributing member of society when you have these burdens? It's completely immoral, and it's a very, very common occurrence. And I'll just give you one example. This is not an example of a summer shuffle, but we just had to lose an incredible new hire that we just hired over the summer, moved from Boston, overqualified for the position. We were so excited to have him, found him some temporary housing, but he needs something stable. He wants to bring his family back home from from Ghana, where he is from, and he could not find a year-round rental, and he had to take a position elsewhere. And those skills are leaving our community, and it's a huge loss for us. And these are just some examples that happen every day, all the time.
Yeah, for years ago we were talking about the brain drain. It's that we see the drain of everything that really makes our community hum along. So let's talk about some of the problems, some of the challenges. So what are the policies such as zoning and development, such as permitting bottlenecks that are contributing to the problem? Alisa, do you want to take that?
Well, I mean, zoning is the foundational problem, right? And in the early 1900s, we decided to start zoning so that we could keep commercial and agriculture and residential separate, right? That translated in the 50s to really making sure that who's in those residential areas and making sure that black and brown people couldn't be in those residential areas. And so that kind of snob zoning, if you will, really was adopted widely and accepted widely across the country with this idea of you got to keep the agriculture separate, right? You got to keep the water clean. And we adopted that on the Cape with 1 acre zoning, with this idea that we were going to keep our waterways clean. We have one aquaculture here. I don't know if Paul talked about that in the last session, but water and purity of water, having clean water is very important to our economy. It's very important, period, in human life. And so we adopted this 1 acre zoning. So as time has gone on, right, where families have lived here for generations, children have gone to school here, they want to stay where they went to school, right? And then we have retirees coming in who want to retire here. We have this pressure for the housing that's available. When you only have one house per acre, you run out of housing and supply pretty quickly, right? So that's where we are. We've run out of land to build on, and we've run out of housing available. And when you throw in the investor that can short-term rental it, and you don't change your bylaws so that you can allow more than one house per lot, pretty soon you're in this restrictive environment where the demand is very high and the cost is very high, and cutting the rest of us out. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the history, long story about why we are where we are. But the fact is, it's changeable. Right. That's the piece. It's by human design, and humans can change it.
The best and the worst part.
Exactly. Yeah.
And historically, right, if you look back pre-1900s, you had a lot of multifamily housing all across the Cape. So a lot of times you hear concerns from folks about changing community character, and actually it's returning to our community character, right?
Yeah, returning to our roots, the fishing villages, and
yeah, and Provincetown is a perfect example, right? When we think about a beautiful place on Cape Cod and a place where people come to visit, it's Provincetown. Right. Why? It's all. It's that everything is close together, everything is really quaint. It's a beautiful little village, and you cannot build Provincetown today. The zoning doesn't allow it, right? So it doesn't make any sense why people would be against the policies that we need to be able to build thriving communities, while also in the same sentence saying that they love the places that those policies could create. So zoning is absolutely number one. We need to allow housing to be built in our village centers. We also, one thing that's kind of different on the Lower and Outer Cape is that we really don't have the infrastructure. When I moved here 15 years ago, we didn't have town water. We still don't have sewer. Everyone's on septic systems, and this is very common on the Lower and Outer Cape. So the zoning doesn't really work unless you unlock it with infrastructure. So we also need to be building the infrastructure. And then because our real estate prices are so high, we need extra money to be able to build in ways that are not necessary off Cape. And so it just doesn't pencil out for a developer, right? If the private market could have solved this problem, it would have. It can't. And that's why municipalities have to get involved in subsidized housing with local dollars. And so allocating that funding locally, which we have, by the way, is a really important piece. But if we just go back one step further, the reason why we don't have the zoning that we need is because people are choosing not to allow it. And that's the really huge opportunity in our region, is that we have town meeting. We can make decisions for our municipalities, and it really doesn't take that many people. It's just that here comes a big issue. Who has historically made these decisions, right? This is actually, there's data about this. Like, I'm not just saying this. There's a BU study, I don't remember her name. Yeah,
Boston
on
University study.
who makes zoning choices. It is generally white, older, male voters who have the time to show up at planning board meeting after planning board meeting and vote down, yes, homeowners, second homeowners too, that are voting down these policies that our communities need. And why? Because those of us who live here year-round, that have small children, that are working multiple jobs because tourism wages are very low and you need multiple jobs to be able to get a living wage, are not available to hang out in town hall and, you know, put the talking points together to skew the conversation. And so who is allowed to make these decisions is a huge piece of this conversation.
Yeah,
And
really
they're
is.
not available because they're working 2 or 3 jobs just to be able to afford to live here.
100%.
And they're raising families.
100%. I mean, and I think that's a topic of one of the other breakout sessions was the participation. But we've seen that over and over again, is that the conversation is skewed from the beginning to leave out certain communities. And it has led to, I would say, kind of a last one in, shut the door behind you mentality. But, you know, without getting into, you know, finger pointing or what have you, I think, you know, all of our organizations have been working really hard on solutions, but we face also, you mentioned the challenges of being able to just retain the workforce, right? And, you know, there's also this mindset, I think, that we come across that, well, we can just import people from over the bridge.
That
Right.
really works out.
And that's how we'll sustain our workforce, right? Can we poke some holes in that? Maybe Tara, do you want to start us off? How far are people really willing to commute?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, when we have seasonal housing and you know, winter rentals and all that, it makes it difficult for those of us who live here year-round to find sustainable year-round housing. I mean, it's almost impossible, literally almost impossible. So if we're pushing, if we're you know, moving off Cape to find all of these opportunities, who do we expect to come drive over the bridge and, you know, make $12 an hour to come serve us and pump our gas and work in our nursing homes, taking care of our elderly, beloved parents? No one's going to drive over the bridge. No one's going to take that drive for $12 an hour. And, you know, they can find those opportunities in between. So it's definitely like, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah, it comes down to choices. People have agency and they have choices, right? And we've all probably been in places in our life where we had to take that job that was a little bit further, or, you know, have a couple of jobs to try to hold things together for our families. But when a firefighter, I live in the town of Orleans, which, for you know, is here at the elbow, right? When the town of Orleans, we have a firefighter, we have multiple, but one of them drives from Plymouth and literally passes 35 stations on their way to work. You don't think that one day they're going to start putting the application out to other places and you're going to lose them, right? The same thing with other workers. They have choice, they have agency, and that's what housing does. It gives people opportunity and options to live their best life and what makes sense for them, right? They want to rent a room, they want a lower cost, lower value apartment to save some money, or do they want to overpay because they're really into the prestige of an address? Who knows? But that's up to them. That's their choice. But when we're forcing people to live miles, you know, sometimes 50, 60 miles away from work, we're limiting their choice, but we're also limiting the character and potential for our communities of who's in our schools. Do you want to know how many kids are in our elementary schools in Orleans? It's less than 10 kids per classroom, right? We spend over $40,000 per student in Orleans to go through our school system. At some point, that's just not a good investment anymore. If you're not going to build the housing so that the families can move here, then we should just close the schools. I know that's controversial, but it's true. Why are we making this investment when the investment in the student can't stay here, the high school graduate can't stay here? why have we spent $250,000 to educate them? It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And it's not sustainable for
No.
employers and
Schools, the community, nothing.
Right, and this is a place, not a playground. It's not Disney World. We're not solving for a workforce. We're sustaining actual, real, living, breathing communities. And so deciding that they can just live elsewhere is not a decision that we get to make as a society. But the only other thing that I'll add to that is, it's kind of funny to me that one of the very, very common complaints about or against housing development is that if you build more homes, then we'll have too much traffic. Well, if you've ever tried to drive onto the Cape in July or August, you will realize why there is so much traffic. It's not because of housing, it's because of tourism and the fact that people need to commute from off Cape. And it can take hours, and not only is that terrible for the environment, but it's like completely illogical and is the problem that people are trying to avoid.
Exactly.
100%. If you haven't noticed, we are a community that we love to be able to just point to somewhere on our arm, just say where we're from. So we're talking about the challenges. I don't want to leave out how these policies further deepen racial and economic inequities. It can sometimes feel like our community prioritizes visitors over residents. Is that really what it is, or is there something deeper at play?
Wow, that's a...
I just threw that one out there.
Thank you for that. I'm going to let Tara take that one. I will say that people make decisions by their pocketbooks, right?
Yep.
And part of what's happening...
Money talks.
Yeah, okay, go girl.
Yeah. Money talks. And, it's also racism. A very unpopular topic that folks like to talk about, but it's the reality. And it's all about who you know, how much you make, and what you can bring to the table, and what the profit is over people.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we're seeing in our real estate market, right? That that we have allowed the market to respond, and in these residential districts, we've allowed commercial entities and commercial endeavors to take over our residential neighborhoods. I mean, that's really what's happening. Is we're competing with people that can get a bank loan based on rents that they can make, not on the income that they actually have. Yep. That's a lopsided market. So the market's responding. We have to change the market so it responds differently.
I'm not here to say whether it's right or wrong or true or not, but I think there's a reason why a lot of year-rounders have bumper stickers that say, "I'm not on your vacation." I'm not saying that that's a good message, but it's a common sentiment, and I think it's tapping into the experience of municipalities, again, listening to certain people and certain voices that are influencing policy. And when you have your economy revolving around tourism, hospitality, and healthcare, those sectors have a lot of sway, and there end up being a lot of policies and decisions that are made to support those sectors, and that just doesn't support the small businesses that are creating the year-round jobs. So
yeah,
that's what I'll say
something
about
you
that.
said about the sentiment that some locals have, I think a lot of locals have, and then somewhat of the sentiment I think that that sometimes are people who come here and move here, who buy a home here. There's a bit of I just want my slice of the Cape, and there's a belief that vacation that you experienced, that week or 2 weeks or that long weekend that you experienced, is something that you can replicate 365 days a year, and that it comes with a community that doesn't have any problems. That it isn't a community. It's just, like you said, sort of a Disneyland. So that's one of the things that I feel like, we as a community can start kind of dispelling, and also maybe help get some of the heads out of the sand about the underlying reasons behind single-family only zoning. It's an ugly history, but if we don't know our history, we're doomed to repeat it. So let's talk about some solutions. What would, in your minds, a year-round sustainable Cape Cod economy look like? If it weren't
It would
the
look
way it is
like going to your local coffee shop and they're actually open on a Tuesday because they have enough workers there to be open, right? It looks like starting to shift our economies away from seasonable dependence to being open year-round or being viable year-round. There are even some small business owners who could be open year-round, but they just haven't worked with someone to do the numbers to realize that losing staff and then having to rehire is actually costing them more than just staying open, not to mention the third spaces that those businesses create and the social fabric that it supports. So I think one of the things that we're exploring at the Community Development Partnership is what leverage points can we affect in partnership with other organizations to promote that shift. Obviously it's not something that any organization can do unilaterally, but we're having those conversations about what are the sectors that are providing year-round living wage employment, and how can we support those sectors, like the construction trades is one. We're working on supporting home-based childcare startups, because when you own a home-based childcare, typically it does create a new living wage job for one person, not to mention it allows people to have, people in a home to both work, so that because they have childcare and we just don't have enough childcare in our communities. So I think the next wave of innovation that I'd love to see the Cape figuring out is how we can move away from this seasonal economy towards a more year-round economy.
Yeah, everything she said. I would add, options. Housing options is really the key to being an economic driver to, racial inequities. Having the options for people, no matter what income, whether they're a retiree or working, whatever industry they're working in, no matter how high paid or how low paid they are, that they're an important a piece of our community, important piece of the fabric and the mosaic of our community, and that we value the people, and we make our policies and our funding to show that value. It's not lost on me that, as we're standing up here talking about housing, we also have lost our SNAP benefits to our 20,000 residents who are now without grocery money this week and potentially into the future. And that's just a demonstration of we're not prioritizing the people, and we're putting the money and profit ahead. And if we keep doing that, pretty soon you don't not only have a community here, we don't have the fabric of a society that we can count on, and people that can participate in any way in any town across America. And that's really sad to not have that be demonstrated in our policies and our funding.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said, and it all boils down to options. It would look like decolonizing the policies and the way things are done. That's what a thriving community would look like. There's so many folks who talk about thriving community. Well, you can't have a thriving community when parts of your community are barely surviving while others are thriving and flourishing. So decolonizing the way that we do things. 100%.
So let's talk solutions. I think that there are a lot of people who, I'll just speak for the home building industry that want to be part of that solution, but legally are not able to be. Right? There's only one path open to them, and that's the single family home. So if we were to upzone, that's potentially one solution. As Paul mentioned, the governor and the legislature passed the Affordable Homes Act, which legalized accessory dwelling units across the state after we had already made some effort to do so here on the Cape. And we know, right, that it's going to be a combination of capital A and some deed-restricted types of policies and market rate. Not one versus the other is not going to solve 100%. So what's the winning combination, and what does that look like in terms of policies?
Do you want me to go first?
Go ahead.
I still think it comes down to zoning. We need to actually make it possible to build more than a single family home, which is mostly what you can build on the Cape. So number one is multifamily zoning by right in village centers. And what that means is that we stop having these conversations in every town every year about what project cannot be there. And instead we just say, hey, We agree that housing belongs here, and then we let the market build it and get out of the way. So legalizing it so that it can be built through zoning is number one. And I think, the coolest thing that could happen in our state is to expand the MBTA Communities Act. So here in Massachusetts, we have, I'm not the expert to talk about this, but in a nutshell, communities that are along the MBTA, which is the metro that goes out of Boston, had to create a multifamily district in their town, and tons of fights, but at the end of the day, with a lot of state partners helping these municipalities, most of them have come into compliance, and it's been the single biggest change around housing production in our state. But that needs to extend to every single municipality in the state. In the Lower and Outer Cape, there is only, let's say, 2 towns that allow you to build more than a single-family home in your entire town. And so if we need to build dense in a way that's not going to hurt our environment and not contribute to more sprawl, then we need to simply decide where can you build it and how, and let the market take its course. But beyond that, I'd say money, infrastructure, political will.
100%. Adding to that, I would say that our Cape Cod Commission has done a lot of great work researching all of the tools from around the world, but primarily in our country. And I would invite you to look at their website. I know Aaron and Christy are in the back of the room, but they have done the deep dive on the seasonal communities. What are the policies? What are the little tweaks you can do here and there? But let's be real. I mean, this is all iterative and reactive. It's not the housing, it's not our problem to solve, it's the tourist industry. You guys have the problem. You have a population and a customer that now wants a single family home to rent. Like, that's what they want. We don't want hotel rooms anymore. We don't want to ram jam our families in. So it's really like, let's stop looking at us and residential to solve your problem, to get more customers, and turn it around and ask you to look at your industry and innovate there. What kind of housing, what kind of building, what kind of offering can you bring to the community that's complementary and not competing with us and the people who live here?
Mm-hmm. Preach. I have nothing to say. That was it.
Yeah, so when we're talking about, we had a conversation yesterday, and I just want to bring back to something that you said, Alisa, which was, she's like, I know, I say stuff all the time.
What did I say?
What did I say? But for those in the room, we are at this juncture where we've gone so far right down this path. If we had our crystal ball and could go back in time 10 years and tell people who are 10 years behind us, because we're the canary in the coal mine, what would we say to our past selves? What policies would we do right away? It's 10 years ago. It's 2015.
You gotta go back further than that.
Okay, it's
Go back
20.
400
years.
Before it got really bad.
No, Airbnb.
2005.
I mean, really, it was Airbnb that changed the whole landscape. Anyone, myself included, could quickly rent out my house for a week, and I had access to this money and this industry and lived in my mother-in-law's backyard to make it work. But that's where I would be more clear-sighted about it, and would have stopped short-term rentals. Would have had more of control of the number allowed and where they were needed. I mean, they're needed. They're an important piece of our economy, an important piece of our community. But it's a different variable when you have a second homeowner who can walk up, pay cash for a house, and is truly a second homeowner versus somebody who needs the rental income in order to afford their second or third home. Yeah. Now, that's not a second homeowner. That's an investor, right? That's a different thing that's happening in our market, and that I would have wished we would have solved for. Along with the zoning, because going back in time, we've been allowing this racist bad zoning for a long time. Mm-hmm. But then secondarily, instead of looking in the rearview mirror and wishing what we would have done like we are now, right? Like, follow the trends, see what's happening, adjust your bylaws and use of housing as an asset and infrastructure in your communities real time, not past tense.
I just want to pick up on what you just said, infrastructure.
Yeah.
So I think if we really want to get fundamental about why we have a housing crisis, it's because of our economic system, right? Where homes are commodities. rather than infrastructure.
Yep.
And I think a really key pivot that we should have made and we still need to make is understanding that homes are not just, their speculative value, right? They're places for people to live in, and they are infrastructure, and we should treat them that way.
Absolutely.
Are there things that you would measure, stats that you would follow? Would you do things like establish year-round deed restrictions and start offering them, to, say, elderly residents in exchange for a tax break or anything like that? That would be a creative thing in addition to those two policies that you both suggested.
The number of trick-or-treaters. Right? Like the number of, we can't roster a girls' basketball team in our elementary school. That's really sad. Right? Like people think like, oh, it's so great. You basically have private school. No, it sucks. Right? My kids are athletic. They want to play sports. They want to have multiple friends. Do you think that by the time they're in 3rd and 4th grade, they haven't outgrown their kindergarten friend? They do. Like we're not all the same. They want friends. So allowing that, counting for children and families and making sure that you don't just have one end of the life cycle, all retirees, right, that you've got the other end and you're nurturing and growing and giving them the opportunities to be here and to invest their lives' work here and their careers here. If we don't have that full cycle, then we're basically a dying society. Yeah. We should, again, hang it up, close the schools.
Mm-hmm. And I will just also add to that, if I could go back in time 10 or 20 years, I would require that every planning board has 1 or 2 renters on it. I would require training for all of those different
Require
boards
training
and
for all regulatory boards and committees, please.
I would require municipalities to outreach to renters and,
It's so basic.
communities of color in order to change who is participating at local government.
Yeah.
Do we have time for questions? Yeah. Okay. Any questions? I could keep going, but in the back?
Yeah, I have 2 thoughts off the top of my head. The first is that it is really, really impossible to participate in town government, whether it's showing up to board and committee meetings or showing up at town meetings. And a lot of residents that we work with who are trying to develop into advocates talk about how we need to redesign town meeting. There's a lot of ways that could go, but there's a lot of resistance as well. There's this balance between trying to protect the direct democracy system that we have and also opening it up to be inclusive, but certainly figuring out virtual hybrid ways for people to get involved without having to figure out childcare or get out of work to be able to participate in local decision making is a big one. And what was my second idea? Participation and what was I thinking? Come back to me.
We can come back.
Well, participation is really important, and I think that picking up what Andrea is saying, it's really not asking us, it's asking the next generation. We have a group that we work with and talk to them about what would it take for you to get involved, to come to a meeting, timing, access. They don't have the same patience for sitting for hours, having the same conversation over and over. Can't hardly blame them. But having that training back to chairs, having it be a little bit more structured and accessible. But I think it is trying to engage the next generation to understand Robert's rules of order. Like basic things that we all kind of maybe take for granted because we've been in the industry, but it is off-putting, and they don't. When do I speak? When do I raise my hand? So it's creating that access and invitation and just asking them to come to the table. Their voice is important.
I wonder if, going to Tara's point about decolonization, if that's not part of it, is sort of, I've done strategic planning, for CARE, for a bunch of different organizations. One of the first things you kind of look at is what are your core values? And, for municipalities, I would say, if we can integrate the idea that we need to be planning for the next, indigenous communities would say, for the next 7 generations. But we have to be planning for and inviting to future residents, not just the people who are already here. And that a core value would also be that we base our outreach on not just the people who have the convenience and the privilege of showing up, but everybody. If we had those core values embedded in our municipalities, I think it would shape a lot of that.
Yeah, totally. I agree. I was just going to add to what Alisa was saying is, making folks in communities of color feel welcomed. Part of that is acknowledging and bringing them in that maybe they don't necessarily have the know-how or the what to do, or they may not know what they're allowed to say or whatever the case may be. And it's really about mentoring them and letting them know that this is their space too. They belong here too. They have a right to speak on their issues as well, and that their voice and their experiences matter just as much. And that's something that it's a responsibility that's on all of us.
Tara, you reminded me of my second thought, which was that, how do we get there?
Right.
Is that if you looked at a town government's budget and thought of it as a business, they would have a communications department.
Right. Yeah.
We don't have communications capacity in our towns, and it's ridiculous. And so what we do instead is, we have a site, we want to build something, we want to know what the community thinks. Shocker, they think you shouldn't build there, so why are you asking them that question? But besides that, they put out a survey, and with perhaps not the best designed leading questions, and the feedback is, people don't want it, so I guess, but that's not the conversation we're having, right? The conversation is, how can we make this project work the best for our community? That's what's on the table, not can we or should we. And so if we had capacity in our town governments to really refine messaging, to get those messages out, and to do the really time-consuming, targeted outreach that is required to be inclusive and to go to all these different populations and meet them where they are and bring them in, we'd have completely different outcomes.
Yeah. One more question?
Great, thank you. Well, if you were standing in front of a big blue lake with big mountains, you would be in Tahoe explaining the exact same challenge. We have the same situation. Really two questions. One, we have a lot of environmental groups that block projects under the umbrella of conservation or environment, but it's straight up NIMBY.
Yep.
So, strategies for that. And then two, do you have any other innovative things going on with public lands being donated for housing? Because like you, our cost of land is a key driver of just the market will go to build a whopper McMansion. Our construction workers would love to build duplexes, apartments, but the market is in the big house. Any other ideas for subsidizing, the cost or policy instead? So 2 parts.
The first subsidy is zoning. So do you have multifamily zoning?
Yeah, we do in certain places, not everywhere.
Right, so that would be the first thing, is to do the analysis of the zoning and to see how many units and can you scale it to meet the numbers and the cost of construction. There's no magic bullet. The money is the money, the loan. The banks have a certain margin they're looking for, and the rents can only get what they get. There are some interesting programs around the country and different things that we're looking at here. Yes, towns buy land. Yes, they put in money. We have housing trusts and CPCs, different committees that put in money towards construction. But it's still a governmentally influenced solution. And as Andrea has said, we really need the market to respond. We can't have taxpayers be the ones constantly, trying to fill this void and take on this burden. We're never going to have enough money. And we can't solve all the other problems that we have. I have a lot to say about environmentalists, but I'm going to see if Andrea's got anything to say first.
Let me see if I can start on that one. So I think it's a false choice to pit conservation against housing. And so at the CDP, several years ago, 9 years ago now, we launched an initiative called the Lower Cape Community Housing Partnership, where we're working on decision makers on both the municipal government side and the voter side to increase, the region's capacity to make better decisions. And so a piece of that has been bringing in the conservation folks to listen, because there are actual valid concerns that we need to address regarding our very, very sensitive environment. And the great thing about housing is that we can have it all, right? It is entirely possible to build densely in a small area in a way that is highly energy efficient, that, if you're using your diversion technology, for example, isn't impacting the environment very much at all. And not make it this either or, but bring people together to work on solutions together. But it takes, again, willingness and a lot of work and a lot of touch points. But I'd love to talk to you about that if you want to reach out. And then, what was the other piece? Conservation and...
Yeah, that was it.
Okay.
Yeah. We did a... So I love it when they start talking, the environmentalists, of, protecting Cape Cod, but they're willing to have the people live 50, 60, 70 miles away and drive there. We don't have public transportation, right? So they got to drive their single car here. And the carbon footprint of that alone is just, enormous. So that's okay, but that house over here on Sewer, now that's the problem. So we did a study with, and a report with our local regional environmental organization association to preserve Cape Cod. And it was exactly that. We agreed, our two agencies agreed, it took us a year to come to agreement, but we came to an agreement on where housing should be, where we should allow density, and where truly we should be preserving. Not because it feels good or because we want more open space or because we just like green better than houses, right? Like real based on fact. And we decided on those zones, and then we applied that agnostically across the Cape. And we figured out where we could zone for multifamily, and we agreed as an agency that's where we would make our investments in housing. That's where we would advocate for sewers and the investment in infrastructure. And honestly, it was more green than it was for the housing side because of how sensitive and the responsibility we have to the land and the water here and to protect that. But knowing that, right, then that gives us a target of where we're going, where we can zone, the production that's needed in that region and in those areas. So it was not easy, I'll tell you. It took a couple of years, but it was a worthwhile effort. It's called Grow Smart Cape Cod. If you want to look it up, there's a report and a website on it. And it's worth doing in your communities. It's worth trying to bring them together and trying to have that conversation and create that agreement. And then an agreement on how you will operate with each other when controversial issues come up, where they'll be silent, where they'll support, where you won't support, so that you're not having a foe at around the corner. The foes that are there are the ones that aren't using fact.
And I'll just add, too, that one of the things that a number of us have come together, with our local Association to Preserve Cape Cod, as was mentioned, but our environmental community in general. And I think there's a distinction between faux environmentalists who just suddenly discovered they're environmentalists because there's a housing project next door that's being proposed, and true environmentalists. And I find that we can work generally pretty well with true environmentalists because your principles are your principles, right? It's when your principles shift for the situation that it becomes a little dodgy. So when one of the things that we have made sure that we're doing on the housing side is also to support them when they are advocating for infrastructure for, in our case, our wastewater problem. And other issues that come up, to make sure that we're supporting one another because they are so hand in hand. And we know that we can't just develop necessarily willy-nilly. We have to be thoughtful and mindful about it. So I do think that finding the true folks who are interested in making progress on environmental issues that are reasonable actors is an important step to getting away from this dichotomy and a false choice, as Andrea said.
Yeah.
Did you have something else you wanted to add?
I just remembered you were asking about public land. And so I just wanted to share that the larger scale projects on the Lower and Outer Cape that have actually moved along are exclusively because the town has donated land. Yeah. And so if you expect a developer to buy the land, the project is uneconomical and it just won't happen. And so that's just a basic piece that needs to happen here.
And I'll also mention that our governor has made it a priority to identify state-owned land and may make it available as well. I think we're at time, but I think we'll be available to answer any questions afterwards. Thank you so much. You've been a great audience. Grab some coffee.